The threat that I worry the most about is not Russia, it's not China, and what I worry about is the threat from within.
It happened in 30 breath-holding seconds that felt like 30 years. One moment, Senator J.D. Vance was gliding through another late-night cable interview, tie knotted tight, voice crisp, eyes fixed on the lens. The next, his words stalled at the back of his throat. A flicker of confusion crossed his face, the kind we've all worn while trying to hide raw panic. He blinked twice, lowered his gaze, and drew a breath so heavy the microphone caught it. Then, barely louder than a sigh, came a phrase that detonated across the internet. "I can't do this anymore." Within minutes, that 6-word whisper was clipped, captioned, memed, and threaded into every feed from Capitol Hill to small-town diners. Viewers debated whether it was burnout, a nervous misfire, or a carefully planted seed for a second-act narrative. Pundits scrambled for fresh angles, but nobody could agree on what they'd just witnessed, a calculated pivot or a crack in a man who'd carried too much for too long. Outside the studio, rumors ignited like dry brush. Staffers whispered about canceled meetings, reporters dredged up half-forgotten tweets, and body language gurus slowed the footage to frame by frame, claiming they saw resignation in the slump of his shoulders. Yet the mystery only deepened when Vance vanished. No follow-up post, no clarifying statement, nothing but silence that roared louder than any press conference. And so the question lingers. Did America just watch a career implode in real time, or did we witness the first move of an audacious rebrand? To answer that, we have to rewind the tape, past the Senate chamber, past the bestseller lists, all the way to the cracked sidewalks of Middletown, Ohio, where this story truly begins. J.D. Vance wasn't born into power, he was born into chaos. Middletown, Ohio, once a humming steel town, had slid into layoffs, cheap heroin, and frayed families by the time he arrived in 1984. His mother cycled through relationships and addiction, leaving young J.D. to bounce between relatives and, most importantly, his no-nonsense mama, whose foul mouth and hard rules kept him from drifting entirely off the map. Yet the escape hatch wasn't luck, it was the Marines. At 18, he enlisted, traded shattered factory windows for desert sand, and learned how discipline can outrun despair. After Iraq, he cashed the GI Bill at Ohio State, graduating summa cum laude in 2 blisteringly fast years, then stunned everyone again by landing at Yale-Law. That improbable leap became his brand. A professor urged him to put the journey on paper, and in 2016, Hillbilly Elegy exploded onto bestseller lists, turning Vance's childhood trauma into a national mirror. TV bookings followed, then a Ron Howard Netflix film that made his Appalachian memoir a household title. Silicon Valley noticed too. Peter Thiel wooed him into venture capital, and by 2019 Vance was co-founding Narya Capital, backed by tech titans who rarely mingle with Rust Belt storytellers. This mix of grit and ivy polish let Vance talk opioids with factory workers at noon and pitch startups to billionaires by dusk. Reporters framed him as the translator between forgotten towns and elite boardrooms, a narrative he leaned on when he jumped into Ohio's 2022 Senate race. But every myth has seams. The same rags to riches arc that wowed cable hosts also planted a ticking question. How long can an underdog stay believable once he's sipping donor champagne? That tension would shadow him straight into Washington, and eventually to that unraveling night on live TV. On paper, Senator Vance looked tailor-made for MAGA stardom, blue-collar roots, Ivy League polish, and a rousing endorsement from Donald Trump. But once he swore in, he yanked the Senate spotlight onto himself with a string of headline-grabbing gambits that left allies cheering and leadership grimacing. First came the stark pivot. The same man who'd compared Trump to another Hitler back in 2016 now called himself the movement's field general, insisting his earlier criticism was immature. Skeptics inside the GOP tagged him a shapeshifter, willing to torch yesterday's convictions if today's polling demanded it. Then he detonated another fault line, Ukraine. While most Republicans framed aid as a freedom crusade, Vance dismissed it as a foreign war distraction, warning that pouring cash into Kyiv while Ohio towns crumbled was pure folly. That soundbite ricocheted through conservative talk radio, but in the marble hallways it triggered eye rolls. One senior staffer leaked that leadership began trimming Vance from sensitive whip calls to keep meetings on track. Isolation bred irritation. Irritation spilled onto X, where his midnight posts hammered globalist warmongers and sparked flame wars he rarely won. Big tech became his next trench. Vance vowed to rip out Section 230 protections root and branch, painting Silicon Valley as the new cartel. Lobbyists counterpunched, donors threatened to close checkbooks, and colleagues tied to California money quietly froze him out. Even friends muttered that he was acting more talk show host than senator, chasing viral clips over committee wins. Meanwhile, staff turnover ticked upward as aides complained he scrutinized every memo like a battlefield map, demanding total war, language that played well online but tanked bipartisan negotiations. All of it compounded the invisible strain. Skipped caucus lunches, curt hallway nods, thousand-yard stares during floor votes. D.C. gossip wove a tale of a freshman senator running hot on 200-proof ambition, yet running low on allies. The longer the culture war sprint continued, the smaller his inner circle became, setting the stage for the night his composure finally cracked on live TV. The segment was set to be routine, border security, inflation, the usual partisan volley, but 6 minutes in, the air inside the studio shifted. J.D. Vance answered a question about party loyalty with the steady cadence he'd perfected on the stump, then hesitated. Cameras caught a flash of something, fear, maybe disbelief, as his gaze dropped to the desk. He swallowed hard, forcing out half a sentence before the words ceased. A tight smile flickered and died. 11 silent seconds passed, each tick punctuated by studio lights humming overhead. Viewers at home leaned closer. The host, sensing dead air, repeated the question. That's when Vance exhaled, voice a notch lower, and said, barely above a whisper, "The cost of standing alone is heavier than you think." His right hand trembled, knuckles blanching around a pen. The host pressed on, but Vance's replies came fragmented, mentions of family strain, nights he couldn't switch the noise off, the feeling that every hallway in the Capitol echoes with knives. It wasn't a rant, it was confession wrapped in political jargon, and it rang louder than any filibuster. Then came the fatal pause. He leaned toward the mic, eyes glassy, and murmured, "I can't do this anymore." The director cut to a commercial 3 beats later, but the damage was done. Within minutes, the clip exploded across social platforms. Hashtag Vance Meltdown vaulted to trending. Split-screen reactions sprouted like weeds, some praising rare honesty, others calling for immediate resignation. Amateur lip readers slowed post-cut footage, insisting he muttered, "Not worth it." Staffers on Capitol Hill texted reporters that morning meetings had been abruptly canceled. By dawn, cable panels debated whether the senator had just signaled retirement, a nervous collapse, or the opening act of a calculated reinvention. Regardless, one truth settled over Washington. The armor J.D. Vance spent years forging had cracked, and in that fracture the nation glimpsed a story far messier than any stump speech ever dared reveal. Silence can be louder than a press conference, and the 48 hours after Vance's on-air crack felt deafening. His social feeds, normally a fire hose of culture war soundbites, went dark. Reporters who dialed his cell got voicemail. Aides replied with a clipped no comment. That vacuum birthed its own weather. Hill staffers traded screenshots of an alleged email titled "Transition Options," hinting that resignation wording was being drafted just in case. Nothing verified, plenty believed. Inside GOP leadership, the mood split. Traditionalists whispered relief. One called him an unguided missile we can't keep explaining. The MAGA wing, though, bristled at losing a media warrior. Midwestern donors, once dazzled by his memoir, quietly paused new checks. Even more telling was the abrupt absence of his key ally, Donald Trump. The former president, usually first to seize any headline, stayed silent. Was he displeased or merely waiting to see which way the wind blew? Strategists scoured Truth Social for clues. Nothing surfaced. Family strain poured extra fuel on speculation. A grainy hallway clip showed Usha Vance wiping tears while staff guided her toward a service elevator. 2 million views later, opinions split between overwhelmed spouse and marriage in freefall. No proof, just rising static. Reporters refreshed inboxes. Still nothing. With colleagues bracing for a surprise floor speech and cable hosts prepping resignation countdown clocks, the question is not whether Vance's meltdown matters, it's what form the fallout will take. And that leads to a fork in the road that could reshape his career, his family, and maybe even how politicians handle showing scars. Washington loves a comeback almost as much as it loves a collapse, and J.D. Vance now stands at the crossroads where both stories begin. Road 1. The reinvention. His on-air vulnerability could pivot into a new brand of empathetic populism, swapping flamethrower tweets for town hall confessionals. A quick listening tour through Ohio factories, a bestseller on political burnout, and cable producers could be begging for the gentler Vance 2.0. Road 2. Strategic retreat. Allies note he's still a lucrative author with venture capital ties. Stepping down before midterm Bloodsport might preserve the mystique and the speaking fee market, while he resets his life. In this version, Vance trades Senate roll calls for podcast studios, shaping the debate without casting a single vote. Road 3. The family flip. Whispers circle that Usha Vance, Yale resume in hand, could emerge as the next face of the household. If J.D. bows out, she could channel that backstage ferocity into advocacy, or even her own run, turning last week's tears into tomorrow's platform. Stranger dynasties have risen from shakier ground. Each path hinges on a single deadline, the Senate's summer recess. If resignation papers are coming, insiders say they'll land before Congress clears out, giving Ohio's governor time to appoint a placeholder. If they don't arrive, expect a staged reentrance, scripted town hall, soft-focused docuseries, maybe even a handshake photo, with Trump to silence feud rumors. Either way, the clock is loud, and the next move will define whether Vance is remembered as the hillbilly who stormed the castle or the star who burned out on live TV. Until he speaks, every corridor in the Capitol hums with one question: is J.D. Vance writing his second act or drafting his exit line?